Sir, I need you to return to your seat immediately. This area is restricted. The voice was firm, clipped, trained, the kind you'd hear during turbulence or a minor onboard disturbance. But it cracked slightly under pressure, a subtle betrayal of what lay behind it. Brennan Kale, 32, lead flight supervisor on Norvus Flight 619, stood with his arm outstretched in the narrow passage just outside the cockpit. His uniform was immaculate, his badge polished, but the sweat behind his collar betrayed a rising panic he was trying not to show. Behind him, the heavy reinforced door to the flight deck stood sealed open, a grim window into chaos. And yet, the man standing before him, bundled in a scuffed black parka, hands weathered like driftwood, eyes the color of concrete after rain, did not move. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't yelling. But something in his presence made Brennan's authority feel like tissue paper. He looked ancient, not elderly in the slow, trembling sense, but aged like stone, worn down, not broken. Brennan could smell metal on him, the faint scent of oil and dry leather that clung to military museums and forgotten hangars. The man's silence wasn't confusion, it was calculation. Beneath Brennan's shoes, the floor of the Boeing 777 groaned again, that awful, low-frequency twist of steel that only comes when a machine that big is starting to drift without guidance. The kind of sound that changes passengers' expressions from annoyed to afraid. Brennan tried not to flinch. "Sir," he repeated, jaw tight, "do you understand what's happening? This is not the time for confusion or—" "I'm not confused," the old man said quietly. His voice was sanded down, raspy, but it carried. It was the voice of someone used to cockpit noise and radio static. Someone who didn't need volume to be heard. Brennan's composure buckled for a moment. "Okay, good. Then I need you to step back into the cabin." The old man's eyes didn't blink. He looked past Brennan now, not at him, but through him, into the cockpit. The pilot's seat was empty. The co-pilot was there, but slumped forward, motionless, his chin resting grotesquely on the yoke. Autopilot had been engaged, but it was holding them on a trajectory too shallow, too left. Not a nosedive, but not stable either. In the cabin behind them, passengers had started to murmur. Phones were out. People were recording. Panic hadn't taken hold yet, but it was circling like a shark. "Both pilots are unresponsive," Brennan continued, voice hardening. "We've contacted air traffic control. They're going to walk us through the emergency protocol." "No, they're not," the old man said. "What?" Brennan blinked. "You lost satellite comms 4 minutes ago," the man replied without looking away from the cockpit. "That storm ahead is interfering with transmission. No ATC. No radar link. You're alone, whether you know it yet or not." Brennan's blood ran cold. His hand moved to the small receiver at his hip. Dead static. "How do you?" he started. The old man stepped forward. "Because I've been in the sky longer than you've been breathing, and I can hear it screaming." Brennan moved to block him. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again." A pause. Then the man, Elias Trenmore, reached into his coat. Slowly, deliberately, Brennan's pulse jumped. His hand hovered near the cabin intercom switch. But what Elias pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a flat, silver badge, dull with age, sharp around the edges. A hawk clutched a sword, its wings curled over an arched banner that read, 71st Strike Wing, Trenmore. The pin wasn't decorative. It wasn't tourist merchandise. It was military, real. "Who are you?" Brennan asked again. He didn't mean it as protocol anymore. He meant it as a human being trying to make sense of a ghost. The man finally looked him dead in the eye. "They called me Iron Vulture." The lights flickered. The fuselage dipped just slightly, imperceptible to most, but Elias's fingers gripped the doorframe with practiced instinct. "I was flying before this bird was even on the blueprint table," he added. "And I didn't walk to this door by mistake." Behind Brennan, another jolt shook the plane. The cabin erupted into anxious noise. A drink cart slammed against a row of seats. Brennan's voice faltered. "What are you suggesting?" Elias's stare didn't break. I'm suggesting you get out of my way before this turns into a funeral sermon at 35,000 feet. Brennan Kale didn't move. Couldn't move. His mouth opened, then shut, as if buffering reality in slow motion. The man, this relic in a coat stitched from decades of wind, had just said he was the only thing standing between 200 lives and a metal tomb. And Brennan couldn't tell if he was crazy or right. Vulture, Brennan repeated, trying to grasp the name like it was a smoke ring. Is that like a nickname? A veteran thing? Elias Trenmore's expression didn't change. It's a call sign. From when? Brennan pressed. The 60s? You flew what prop planes? Vietnamera Kraft. F-4s. Then later, F-111s. That's not the same. Brennan snapped, the pressure finally punching through his voice. This is a Boeing 777. It's a flying computer, not a battlefield gas can with wings. Elias didn't even blink. And what happens when your computer flies itself into a thunderhead and doesn't know how to improvise? As if summoned by the argument, the plane gave a brief, stomach-lurching tremble. Glasses clinked in the galley. A baby began to cry somewhere mid-cabin. The lights dimmed for a second too long. Jason, the secondary flight attendant, appeared from behind Brennan. His face was pale, and his voice wavered. Kale? We just got a systems ping from the forward avionics rack.
Auto now isn't resting lateral drift.
The course inputs freezing.
Likelag.
And we're way off the original flight plan. Brennan turned, snapping. What do you mean freezing? Reboot the module. I tried. It's locked. And Jason hesitated, then added, ATC dropped. Mid-transmission. We're flying blind. Brennan's throat tightened. A fist of cold certainty began curling around his spine. He turned slowly back toward Elias, who had taken one small step closer to the open cockpit. You knew, Brennan said quietly. You knew we lost comms. Elias's tone was as calm as ever. I knew the moment the wind pitch didn't match the display. You're flying under clouded assumptions. Literally. Then why didn't you say something sooner? Because I was waiting to see if someone up here could take control before I had to. Brennan wanted to deny it. Wanted to reassert the chain of command, the manual, the hierarchy. But something inside him cracked. The part that knew procedure wasn't enough when the sky started changing shape. You're not rated for this aircraft, Brennan said, his voice smaller now but still clinging to rules. The law says if I'm a risk, you keep me seated, Elias replied. But if I'm the only one who can keep the wings level, then the law gets quiet. Jason broke in, voice hushed. Guys, the tailwind just accelerated. Our descent rate is picking up. Autopilot isn't correcting for it. What's our current pitch? Elias asked without turning. Jason blinked. Negative 1.4. Elias's mouth tightened. It should be positive 0.2. You're in a passive drop. How do you know that without even? I don't need to stare at numbers when I can feel what the air's doing, Elias interrupted. Any pilot worth his wings knows when lift starts bleeding. Another sharp tilt, this one enough to rattle the overhead bins. Someone screamed in the back. The emergency lighting flickered a second time. Brennan turned to the cockpit. The co-pilot hadn't moved. The captain's lips had turned a pale gray. Jason leaned in and whispered, There's no one left to fly it. Elias stepped forward again, his boots light but deliberate. Son, he said to Brennan. And this time the word wasn't condescending. It was weighty, like a bridge being lowered between generations. I've seen aircraft lose all hydraulics, both engines and half a wing. I've landed in deserts, on frozen lakes, even on salt flats when the damn tarmac was bombed out. I don't care what metal she's made of. When a bird wants to fall, it's the hand, not the code, that saves it. Brennan stood, eyes darting between Elias, the cockpit, and the blinking, stalling avionics display. Every inch of his training screamed at him to hold protocol, to follow checklist. But checklists didn't write themselves for this. Fine, Brennan muttered, voice ragged. You want the cockpit? You've got 60 seconds. Do something that proves you're not just a story with boots. Elias didn't thank him, didn't nod. He simply walked into the cockpit, rolled back the captain's seat, and wrapped his fingers around the yoke like he'd never let it go. The cockpit wasn't silent. It was humming low and ominous, like a room breathing shallow under strain. Every warning light cast its own colored shadow. Screens blinked inconsistently. The autopilot was still engaged, but it was acting like a drunk trying to balance a tray of glass in a wind tunnel. Elias Trenmore's hands hovered over the yoke without grabbing it yet. His eyes moved across the panel, faster than anyone Brennan had ever seen. He wasn't just scanning. He was reading the aircraft like it was an old story he'd once memorized. Behind him, Brennan hovered near the threshold. Jason stood just outside, eyes wide, breath shallow. "I still think this is a mistake," Brennan muttered, mostly to himself. Elias spoke without looking back. "You're welcome to take over if you know the difference between a slipstream buffer and a shearing oscillation." Brennan blinked. "That's what I thought," Elias said flatly, flipping two switches near the flight management system. "Autopilot thinks we're still flying level, but she's nosing down slowly. You don't see it until it's too late, especially if you've never flown through a bandit tailstream at 10,000 meters in a thunder cell." "Are you seriously comparing this to a combat run?" Brennan snapped. Elias's voice remained steady. "Only difference is I used to fly through enemy fire. This time the enemy is your tech." Another tremor. Not a dip, a shake, like the jet had hit a pocket of invisible gravel. In the cabin, a scream pierced the fuselage. Somewhere, something metal crashed to the floor. Jason grabbed the overhead handhold. That sounded like a storage rack breaking loose. Elias's hand moved to the throttle, adjusting gently. He hadn't even buckled in yet. "You've lost airflow over the left wing's inner edge," he said, eyes narrowing at the telemetry. "Stalling patterns building from the center, not the tips. It's a software imbalance." "You're guessing," Brennan shot.
No, Elias replied. I'm remembering.
Then he touched the yoke, gently, reverently, like greeting an old friend who'd been held hostage by someone else. Jason leaned forward. Wait, are you actually?" Elias interrupted. "Disengaging autopilot." 3 beeps sounded in warning. Then, silence. The plane responded instantly, like a creature startled back to instinct. Tipped slightly left, then right. A long-forgotten sense of raw weight returned to the fuselage. Elias countered with 2 fingertip corrections. The plane groaned in protest, then began to listen. Brennan stared. He had seen military documentaries, simulations, advanced pilot training sims in VR. But nothing looked like this. The old man wasn't flying the plane like it was a machine. He was communing with it. He moved like he already knew what each resistance meant, as if the yoke whispered the shape of turbulence into his palms. Jason, awestruck, whispered, "What's he doing?" "He's not just flying," Brennan said. "He's feeling it." Elias spoke quietly, almost to himself. "She's not a number, not a dashboard. She's a bird. And right now, her wings are cold, her guts off balance, and she's screaming under the clouds." He glanced up at the overhead altimeter. They were descending too quickly. 34,100 feet. 33,750. Air density was increasing, which meant more control, but also more drag. If they didn't restabilize soon, they'd enter heavy chop with a tilted fuselage, and the aircraft wouldn't survive it. Elias pushed the nose down slightly, just a hair. Brennan gasped. "What are you doing? We're already losing altitude." "We're in a stall approach," Elias replied. "This plane is too heavy to climb when airflow breaks off the top of the wing. Push first, then rise." It was counterintuitive, dangerous. It was also correct. Seconds later, the stall warning flickered once, then vanished. The cabin steadied. The rattling stopped. A single chime rang out from the ceiling. Jason's eyes widened. Pitch stabilized. She's level. Airspeed's returning. Elias adjusted the trim tabs without looking. The silence in the cockpit was deafening. Brennan took a slow step inside, gaze fixed on the instruments. "You're really doing this?" Elias's jaw was clenched now. "I was doing this before you were born." He didn't say it with arrogance. He said it like someone reminding the sky who still spoke its language. Behind them, passengers began murmuring again, but this time it was different. Confused, but calmer. Phones lowered. Heads turned toward windows. Jason whispered, "You saved the plane."
No, Elias corrected.
"I bought us time." He leaned forward, hands poised. "Now let's see where this bird wants to land." The cockpit no longer felt like a tomb. It was still dim, still humming with electricity and pressure, but it breathed again. Elias Trenmore sat tall in the left seat now, hands light on the yoke, every fingertip movement precise. The autopilot was off, but the plane, Flight 619, was flying straight, stable. Alive, like a spooked animal slowly learning to trust the touch of an old master. Jason stood behind him, shoulders slack, blinking at the sudden lack of alarms. The artificial horizon was level. Airspeed was back in the green. Brennan, still gripping the doorway like it might vanish if he let go, stared at the instruments. That's not possible," he muttered. "You're airborne," Elias replied without turning. "Not immortal. Don't confuse recovery with safety." Jason looked at the backup NAV screen. "But we're climbing again, right?"
No.
"Not climbing," Elias said. "I arrested the descent, leveled her out, but she's still bleeding direction. This storm cell is stronger than your weather software predicted." Brennan stepped forward reluctantly, glancing at the overhead panel. "You sound like you've done this in a jet like this before." "I haven't," Elias said, adjusting trim tabs again. "But I've done it in aircraft that didn't forgive errors. And this one," he tapped the control column lightly. "She still wants to fly. That's all that matters." Outside, the storm twisted, layers of cloud folding over each other like bruised silk. Pockets of turbulence danced invisibly across the sky. But the Boeing held, not perfectly but confidently. Jason tapped the radio interface. Still no SATCOM.
No ATC.
"They're probably rerouting everything around this quadrant by now," Brennan muttered. "Or preparing for a recovery operation." Elias didn't answer, but he was thinking. Not just about this flight, about where it needed to go next. The software had defaulted to a return-to-origin protocol, but that would take them straight back into the thickest part of the pressure front. And time, real, breathable time, was running thin. Jason's voice cut through the silence. "You said earlier you'd landed on salt flats?" "Once," Elias replied. "During a recon blackout in '86. Middle of nowhere.
No lights, no flares, no ATC.
Just the wind and a compass made of gut instinct." Jason hesitated. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Elias said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Harlan Ridge." Brennan's head snapped toward him. "That airstrip's been shut down for 14 years. Elias nodded. "Which makes it perfect." Jason blinked. "Perfect? For what?" "For vanishing," Elias said. "For putting this bird down where no one expects her." Brennan frowned. "Hold on. There are real airports out here. Major runways. Emergency diversion fields." "Exactly," Elias said. "Which means they're all on a grid. Monitored. Scrambled now with this comm blackout. If this plane starts a standard approach without comms, someone's going to assume hijack protocol and will have intercepts inside 2 minutes." "But Harlan Ridge," Brennan began. "Harlan Ridge isn't on any commercial routing protocol anymore," Elias said calmly. "But the runway's still there, buried under snow and politics. I helped map it. I flew the last sortie out of it when they shut it down. I know every tree line and crosswind fingerprint within a 5-mile radius." Jason exhaled. Why would they shut down a military airstrip in the middle of usable airspace? Elias turned his head just slightly. "Because we buried 6 men there. Rangers. Burned down in an extraction op no one talks about. Too much silence. Not enough truth. I go back every year. Just once. On foot, never in the air. This time's different. The cockpit went quiet again. Brennan wasn't sure what to say. Part of him still saw an old man in a seat he had no right to claim. But the other part, the part that had just watched a stall recovery no one else on board could have performed, knew better. Outside, the clouds parted just long enough to reveal jagged, frost-lined peaks below. Elias adjusted their heading. Not wildly, just a slow, precise turn, like pointing a blade. "I'll need confirmation," Brennan said quietly. "If you want this rerouted to a decommissioned site, Norcom has to approve it." "They will," Elias said, his voice lowering. "Because in about 60 seconds, they're going to hear a sound they haven't heard in 20 years. Jason looked up from the panel. "What sound?" Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a small analog dial. Not a modern digital tool, but a military beacon encoder. Scratched. Old school. He twisted the frequency. A low hum filled the radio channel. "Legacy Cold Beacon 71 strike," Elias murmured. "Broadcasting now." Brennan froze. "That's not civilian code," he said.
No, Elias answered.
"It's a resurrection." In the secure nerve center of Norcom Operations Command, a subterranean facility buried beneath the mountains of Montana, a red light began to pulse on console 12A. It didn't beep. It didn't flash. It pulsed, slow, deliberate, and unervingly silent. Lieutenant Casey Doran furrowed his brow and leaned forward. "Captain," he called over his shoulder, "we've got a cold legacy beacon pinging from civilian airspace, Western Corridor." The supervising officer, Captain Lorne Nash, turned with a frown. "Cold legacy? That's not possible. Nothing's used that bandwidth since." He trailed off, already walking toward the screen. Casey tapped a few keys. The beacon frequency came into focus. 71 strike. The room fell quiet. "That's not a training code," Nash said slowly. Casey looked up, voice dry. "No, sir. It's not even supposed to be active. The last authenticated use was Harlan Ridge, 17 years ago." They looked at each other. "Pull the audio." Casey did. A short burst of signal burst through the speakers, distorted by age and atmosphere, but clear enough to pierce the room. "This is Iron Vulture. Jet compromised. Manual control active.
Alt 35,400.
Request air corridor to grid Alpha 3 for emergency descent." Nash staggered back like he'd been slapped. "Iron Vulture? Sir, get General Weston Darren. Now, I don't care if he's asleep, golfing, or getting married. Now." The room burst into motion. Back aboard Flight 619, Elias leaned slightly to the right and tapped the rudder pedal. The plane shifted gently in response, obeying his adjustment like a well-trained horse. The wings cut through high winds as the clouds began to thin. Behind him, Brennan Kale and Jason still stood like statues. "I didn't think old birds like that beacon still worked," Jason whispered. "They don't," Elias murmured, "unless someone wired it for resurrection." Brennan folded his arms. "And you knew they'd answer?" "I wasn't calling just anyone," Elias replied. "I was calling the few who remember the world before it got quieter." Back at Norcom, the elevator dinged and General Weston Darren stepped into the room like a storm in uniform. He was older now, gray at the temples, but his voice still carried battlefield weight. "Talk to me," he barked. Captain Nash stepped forward. "Unidentified beacon activated 19 minutes ago. Broadcasting from a Boeing 777 currently flying blind. No pilot comms.
No transponder updates."
And sir," he hesitated. The voice. It said it was Iron Vulture. General Darren froze. "Say that again." "We confirmed it via legacy tone encryption, sir. Voice imprint is a 98% match from archived, declassified materials." General Darren moved like a man possessed. He crossed the ops floor in seconds and slammed his palm against a console reader, unlocking an encrypted flight path archive. A single file appeared. Trenmore, Elias. Brigadier General Rhett. Call sign, Iron Vulture. Status, deceased. Presumed Kia, Ridge incident. Darren muttered to himself, "You old bastard. You're still flying." He spun toward the main screen. "Scramble fighters. 2F-18 Hornets. Get them in the air now. And patch the comm link direct to this console. I want eyes on Flight 619 within 5 minutes." "Sir. Confirm escort or intercept?" "Escort," Darren said. "Escort with respect. We don't question ghosts when they return, we follow them." Back on Flight 619, a ripple moved through the cabin. It began as a vague feeling, a silence falling over the murmurs. Then someone gasped. Then another. Jason glanced out the starboard window and nearly dropped the intercom handset. Holy hell! An F-18 Hornet, sleek and gray like a panther of the sky, pulled into view just outside the wing. A second followed moments later, taking position on the left. Their precision was terrifying, close enough to see the pilot's helmet, reflective and faceless. In the cockpit, Elias saw them, and his mouth tugged into the faintest grin. "Someone's listening," he murmured. A crackle came over the military channel. "Flight 619, this is Ghost Lead. We read you 5 by 5. Iron Vulture, you have our wings. Sky is yours, sir. Say the word." Brennan's jaw fell open. Jason stared in disbelief. Elias lifted the mic calmly, like an old priest picking up scripture. "Ghost Lead, this is Iron Vulture. Good to see you, boys. We're headed for Harlan Ridge. Clear me a corridor and prepare the old bones." "Copy that, Vulture." Corridor confirmed. "Welcome home." Inside the cabin, a mother leaned over to her teenage son and whispered, "What's happening?" The boy, eyes wide, held up his phone. "The pilot's call sign is trending," he said, awe in his voice. The screen showed one line. "Iron Vulture is flying again." The 2 F-18s flanked Flight 619 like sentinels made of shadow and steel. Passengers leaned across the windows, mouths agape, phones held in trembling hands. The fighter jets didn't swoop or soar. They matched the airliner's speed with supernatural grace, hovering just feet off the wings like guardians escorting a fallen king. For many on board, it was the most terrifying moment of their lives. For Elias Trenmore, it was a reunion. Inside the cockpit, the military radio buzzed to life again. "Iron Vulture, this is Ghost Lead. We are clearing a path eastbound through Corridor Juliet 6. Weather thinning ahead. Confirm Harlan Ridge coordinates." Elias responded without hesitation, his voice low, steady. "Grid Alpha 3. Ridge clearance frequency 81.1. Slope vector northeast. Approach heading 153. Confirm visual path to snow-cut and buried runway overlay." There was a pause, then awe in the pilot's voice. "Confirmed, Vulture. You still remember it." "I don't forget what cost me men," Elias said quietly. Behind him, Brennan and Jason stood frozen in place. The dashboard lights shimmered across their faces, casting them in strange colors, part reverence, part disbelief. The man in front of them was no longer a passenger. Not even just a pilot. He was something else. Jason whispered, "Did he just quote the slope vector from a runway buried under 2 feet of snow?" Brennan nodded slowly. "Yeah. And the frequency. And the wind arc." Jason glanced at him. "How the hell does he know all that?" Elias spoke before either of them could answer. "I was there the night Ridge was blacked out. January 06. We were flying hot evac with no lights. Radio silent. Rangers trapped in a gorge northwest of the cut. My co-pilot took a flak hit through the spine. Still got us down, still got those men out. All but 6. His voice didn't break, but it cooled the room. "After that," Elias continued, "they shut it down, turned Ridge into a rumor, let it rot under politics. But I remember every groove in her bones." Jason took a step back. "Why go back there now?" "Because she never got to bring someone home," Elias murmured. "Tonight, she gets the chance." Back at Norcom, a half-dozen radar operators stared at a shared screen. A red dot, Flight 619, had veered off all known commercial lanes and was now following a long-forgotten military flight corridor last used during joint NATO drills over a decade ago. General Weston Darren stood in front of the display, arms folded, heart pounding. "He's doing it," he said aloud. "He's actually doing it." An aide turned. "Sir, Ridge isn't classified anymore, but it's buried. It's unstable. It wasn't maintained for anything larger than a cargo C-130. General Darren's eyes narrowed. "He's not anything. He's Iron Vulture." Then he barked, "Get a ground team there. Light flares. Clear what you can. Heat the snow. I don't care if you have to melt it with jet exhaust. Give him a goddamn runway." In the cockpit, Elias toggled the trim again. The plane responded instantly. He wasn't fighting the jet anymore. He was guiding it like a falconer with a bird too powerful to leash, but just wise enough to listen. "Descent begins in 90 seconds, Elias said. "Brace the cabin. Notify the passengers." Jason blinked. "You're actually going to land this thing at Ridge?" "No," Elias said. "We are." He looked over his shoulder. "I'll get them there. You tell them why they're not afraid." Jason ran out. Brennan didn't move. For a long moment, he stood in the narrow cockpit doorway, watching the man who just days ago would have been dismissed as someone's granddad. Now he was flying the impossible, escort fighters off each wing, a buried landing strip ahead, and 200 lives balanced in his grip like feathers. "I didn't believe you," Brennan said quietly. "I treated you like a relic. I thought you were lost." Elias didn't take his eyes off the horizon. "Don't blame yourself," he replied. "Most people think legends are supposed to stay buried." Outside, the F-18s peeled slightly back, forming a wider escort arc as Flight 619 began a long, shallow descent. In the cabin, Jason picked up the intercom, hands shaking but voice strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for an emergency descent. Please follow all instructions from the crew. I need you to trust us, and I need you to know something important." He took a deep breath. "The man flying your plane, he isn't part of the crew. He's a passenger. He stood up when no one else could. He's not on the manifest as a pilot. But right now, the United States Air Force is flying beside us to protect him. Because they know his name." The cabin held its breath. Jason spoke two words that rang through every heart in the pressurized silence. "Iron Vulture." The wind over Harlan Ridge had teeth. It howled between the peaks like a thing alive, cutting across the abandoned landing zone with 30-knot side gusts and a cross-shear that would challenge even modern fighter jets. But on the ground, military floodlights now pierced through the swirling snow. Ground crews, hastily scrambled from the nearby decommissioned base, worked with frantic precision. They used heat blowers, snow shovels, even the engines of transport vehicles to melt ice from what remained of the ancient airstrip. "Flares are up," one tech called over comms.
Perimteli.
"We've cleared 2,100 feet of straight-line usable tarmac." Another shouted. A forward controller turned toward his comms officer. "That's not enough runway for a 777. The officer didn't look away from the radar. "It is for him." Overhead, Flight 619 sliced through the last layer of dark cloud. In the cockpit, Elias Trenmore had switched to a lower oxygen mask, the kind designed for low-altitude dogfights. His hands worked with an eerie calm, adjusting throttle, rebalancing fuel tanks to change weight distribution, switching off redundant systems that would only slow the descent. Each move was deliberate, intimate, like he wasn't flying a jet, but guiding a memory back to life. Brennan stood behind him, silent. No more challenges, no more doubt, just awe and a growing sense of guilt. Jason returned to the cockpit, voice tight. "Cabin secure. Crews strapped in. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Elias didn't take his eyes off the altimeter. "Good. Because she's ready too." The descent rate increased, not in panic, but in precision. Elias dropped the nose slightly, trimmed the wings against the wind's bite, and let the air pull them down into a shallow, controlled dive. "Runway elevation is 5,310 feet," Elias muttered to himself. "Crosswind from west. Snow vapor on final third. FOD risk. Watch your brake delay." Jason swallowed. "Are you talking to us? Or to yourself?" Elias cracked the faintest grin. Old habit. I always narrate when it gets quiet. Reminds me I'm still in control. The radio crackled. Iron Vulture, this is Ridge Control. We have flares active. Winds at surface. West-northwest, 25 knots. Visual approach confirmed. Final is hot. Say status. Elias keyed the mic. Status. Descending on glide. Heavy bird. Half-wing weight unbalanced due to frozen port fuel line. Manual only braking. Target vector locked. ETA touchdown. 90 seconds. The response came with reverence. Copy that, Vulture. We'll hold the wind for you. Inside Norcom HQ, General Weston Darren stared at the screen as Flight 619 dropped into the mountainous corridor like a phantom. The radar pings now showed the twin fighter escorts falling back slightly, giving Elias space. Space and respect. The tech leaned in. Sir, he's coming in steep. Darren didn't blink. No. He's coming in with conviction. Back in the cockpit, Brennan's hands gripped the back of the pilot's chair. He had watched men fly in simulators, watched drone pilots rehearse emergencies in air-conditioned rooms. But nothing looked like this. Every sound mattered. Every instrument twitch. The way Elias gently angled the nose into the crosswind. The way he anticipated the turbulence before it hit, adjusted trim by intuition instead of software. You're not fighting the jet, Brennan whispered. No, Elias said. I'm listening to her. You don't fight something this big. You negotiate. Jason sat down behind them and strapped into the observer's jump seat. He exhaled slowly. I think I get it now. What? Brennan asked. The name, Jason said. Iron Vulture. Not just a cool call sign. You don't dive like this unless you're ready to fly into the worst part of the storm and come out clean. Outside, the first floodlights of Harlan Ridge broke through the blizzard haze. Elias saw the strip, narrow, icy, pocked with shadows, and smiled. She remembered me. Then his voice dropped a register. Gear down. Brennan reached instinctively for the panel. You want help? Elias looked at him and for the first time nodded. Brennan swallowed, then lowered the landing gear switch. The heavy groan of hydraulics filled the cabin as the wheels descended into place. The landing gear locked with a deafening clunk. Jason whispered, This is insane. No, Brennan said. This is history. The wind at Harlan Ridge screamed louder now, not in resistance, but in anticipation. Snow tore sideways across the exposed runway, flares burning like ghost torches along either side. The skeletal outline of a landing strip, barely cleared, shimmered under portable floodlights and melting frost. Emergency vehicles lined the perimeter, ambulances, snowcats, flame-retardant tankers, their crews standing still, staring skyward, waiting for the impossible. And through the clouds she came. Flight 619 broke through the final veil of storm like a silver arrow through silk. Her nose was pitched low, her gear down. Her wings locked steady in defiance of the crosswind that wanted to roll her like a coin across the sky. In the cockpit, Elias Trenmore's hands moved with meditative grace. Crosswind from 280, nose into wind, port side light, reduce thrust by 6. He didn't think. He remembered. He responded. Like a call and answer between man and machine. Brennan sat beside him now, no longer an obstacle, but an assistant. His face was tight with tension, but his hands followed instructions without question. Jason sat behind them in the jump seat, silent, jaw clenched, gripping the seatbelt as if it might tether him to the moment. Below, Harlan Ridge opened its arms. But only barely. We've got 2,100 feet, Brennan warned. That's... I know, Elias replied. That's a postage stamp. The radio cracked again. Iron Vulture, this is Ridge. Wind holding. Surface cleared. You are clear to land. Godspeed. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. He lined up the approach by feel, not by the NAV system, not by the sensors, but by the echo of a runway he'd landed on decades before in fire and smoke. Altitude, 2,100. Altitude, 1,400. Wind speed shear rising. Every signal said abort. But Elias didn't even blink. Throttle cut in 3, he whispered. 2, 1. The engines reduced to idle. The flaps fully extended. The plane sliced through the final 100 feet like a great bird in glide. And then, contact. The rear wheels kissed the ice-slick tarmac. Not slammed, not bounced, but touched. A hush fell in the cockpit. Then the nose came down, smooth, like a hand laying gently upon memory. Brennan's voice shook. Reverse thrust engaged. Jason shouted from behind. Spoilers deployed. The plane groaned, not from pain, but from effort. Snow exploded out from under the wheels like mist. The tires screamed across frost as the brakes locked in a stutter pattern. The end of the runway approached fast, too fast. Trees beyond it swayed, hungry for error. Elias gritted his teeth. Come on, girl. Hold. The aircraft slowed. 80 knots, 65, 40. The end of the tarmac loomed. A jagged drop into snow-covered rock. The final flare marker blurred past the window. And then the plane stopped, dead still. Nose tipped slightly, steam hissing from every vent. A moment of absolute silence. Then a roar. Inside the cabin, passengers burst into tears, into cheers, into stunned silence. Some clapped, some wept, some just stared forward, too overwhelmed to understand what had just happened. In the cockpit, Elias sat back, hands still on the yoke. He exhaled slowly, not in relief, in respect. You did good, he whispered to the aircraft. Jason ripped off his headset. We're down, we're really down. Brennan looked over at Elias. That was... But the words never came. He just stared, like a man who had witnessed something ancient. Something that didn't belong to this world anymore, but had come back for one final encore. Outside, the emergency crews approached. But they didn't rush. They moved slowly, reverently, like approaching a sacred landing site. Elias unbuckled his harness. His hands trembled now, not from fear, but from age. His body remembered what it had endured. But he stood tall. Brennan spoke first. Why Harlan Ridge? Elias paused. Because this place was never meant to die forgotten. It just needed one more landing. One last mission. Now it can rest. The cockpit door opened. A soldier stepped in, frost clinging to his collar. He saluted sharply. Sir, welcome back. Elias returned it with a tired but precise nod. Good to be back on the ground. As passengers disembarked into the snow, they turned one by one toward the cockpit, toward the man whose name they now whispered like myth. Iron Vulture. And somewhere above them, in skies that once forgot how to fly, the clouds parted, just for a moment, letting light fall on a story that had come home. Harlan Ridge was never built for cameras. There were no jet bridges, no terminals, just wind, silence, and an abandoned field that once whispered stories only soldiers remembered. But this morning, it was lit up like a movie set. A dozen military floodlights bathed the snow-blasted landing zone in sterile white. Camera drones hovered above, circling slowly. Emergency crews moved among passengers with blankets and cocoa and stunned looks that hadn't left their faces since touchdown. The wreckage of disbelief still clung to the air. Flight 619 had made headlines in less than an hour. First, a viral post from Seat 14C. My pilot was a passenger. Call sign, Iron Vulture. He just landed a 777 at a base that doesn't exist anymore. We were escorted by fighter jets. This wasn't a dream. Attached was a blurry but unmistakable photo. A side shot of Elias Trenmore at the yoke, focused, steady, lit by green control lights and framed by storm. Within 30 minutes, the tag #IronVulture was trending worldwide. Back at Norcom, General Weston Darren watched the footage silently from his private console. It wasn't the social media storm that worried him. It was what came next. Get ahead of it, he ordered his comms officer. Get FAA, DHS, Civil Aviation, all of them on a joint release. Paint this right. Control the story. Pause. But don't diminish him. The officer blinked. Sir, Darren's voice hardened. He didn't save 200 lives for a footnote. Meanwhile, just beyond the aircraft, Brennan Kale stood ankle-deep in snow, staring up at the jet. It looked different now, not because the paint had changed, not because of the ice crusted across the wings, but because of what had happened inside it, what he had witnessed. Elias Trenmore, that strange old man he had almost removed by force, had pulled a 200-ton machine out of a stall, rerouted to a forgotten strip in the mountains, landed with crosswind breaking on 2,100 feet of ice-slick runway, and never once raised his voice. Brennan's hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from memory. "You all right?" Jason asked beside him. Brennan nodded slowly. "Yeah, just replaying it." Jason gave a short laugh. "I've replayed it 50 times. Still doesn't feel real." Then, quieter. "You know he was supposed to be dead?" Brennan nodded again. "Yeah, turns out ghosts fly better than anyone." From the base operations tent, a NORCM officer stepped out. "Kale?" Brennan turned. "There's a press rep here asking if you're ready to give a briefing." Brennan blinked. "Briefing? I'm not the pilot." "You were the supervisor," the officer replied. "They're going to ask how you let him in that cockpit." Jason tensed. "Don't let them twist it." Brennan took a breath, and finally, he stood straight. "I'll tell them the truth," he said. "I'll tell them the rules failed. And when they did, experience didn't." The officer gave a short nod and stepped away. Jason nudged Brennan. "You think he's gonna speak? Elias, Brennan glanced toward the ridge. Far off, near the tree line, Elias stood alone. He hadn't spoken to the press. He hadn't even debriefed. He'd helped unload the last of the passengers, then walked out into the snow, past the lights, past the reporters, past the noise, to where no one could bother him. He stood at a ridge that overlooked the far side of the airstrip. In the distance, a small marker stone jutted out of the earth, half covered in frost. Brennan knew what it was. A memorial. 6 names etched in steel. The men who didn't make it back. Elias stood before them now, not saluting, not speaking, just standing. After a long moment, Brennan approached carefully. "I figured I'd find you here." Elias didn't turn. "I figured you would. I told NORCM the truth," Brennan said. "That without you, we'd all be scattered across the side of a mountain." Elias finally looked over. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Brennan said. "I did." Pause passed between them. Then Brennan added, "They want to name the protocol after you. The new one. 4 volunteer flight transfers in airborne emergencies." Elias smiled faintly. "I already had a name once. They're calling it the Vulture Clause." Elias looked out over the mountains. "Good. Maybe this time it'll mean something." Then he turned, nodding once. "You did good up there," he said to Brennan. "You didn't freeze. You adapted." Brennan blinked, stunned by the compliment. "I wasn't alone," he managed to say. "No," Elias said. "But someone always has to be the first to step aside. Let experience speak." A black transport vehicle pulled up at the edge of the clearing. An officer stepped out, saluting sharply. "Sir, your extraction's ready." Elias glanced back at the snow-covered strip. "Tell Ridge it did well." "Yes, sir." He turned to Brennan one last time. "Next time someone tells you they're a pilot, ask them what the sky sounds like when it's afraid. If they know that, let them fly." And with that, he walked away, not into legend, but into legacy. 3 days later, the world had moved on, at least most of it had. The media cycle had done what it always does. Burn fast, burn bright, burn out. Cable anchors ran polished retrospectives. Aviation influencers dissected every angle of the landing. Talk show hosts tried to wrap comedy around a man they couldn't understand. But none of them could quite capture what really happened. Because what happened didn't belong to them. It belonged to 200 passengers. To 2 flight attendants who stood in a cockpit with history. To a ghost who flew one last time, and then disappeared. Elias Trenmore had refused every interview. He declined medals, ignored book offers, denied a documentary. When the Air Force tried to bring him in for an honorary recommissioning ceremony, he gave them a simple reply: "You buried me once. Let me stay buried." What they didn't bury, however, was what came after. The Federal Aviation Board, in cooperation with NORCM and Civilian Aviation Command, officially ratified a new emergency directive, the Vulture Protocol. It was a short, sharp clause inserted into the manual most pilots never actually read in full, the one reserved for exceptional exceptions. The Vulture Protocol authorized, under critical conditions and with corroborated credentials, the handover of commercial flight command to a non-listed pilot, provided they met either legacy military status or multi-engine certification and were physically present in the cockpit. In the legal world, it was a footnote. In the sky, it was a second chance. Brennan Kale stood on a raised platform in a small regional flight safety conference in Sacramento. He wasn't in uniform anymore. He'd resigned from Norvus Airlines just 2 days after the Ridge incident. Now he spoke quietly, to younger stewards, to flight officers, to junior pilots. He showed no slides, no graphs, just a photograph. One still image, a frost-covered Boeing 777 standing proud under fighter escort, with a silhouette visible in the cockpit. "This," Brennan said, "isn't about emergencies. It's about what you do when the rulebook stops speaking. Because sometimes authority isn't in the badge. It's in the breath of someone who remembers what fear in the sky feels like, and flies anyway." In the back row, Jason watched silently. He didn't clap when the audience did. He just nodded slowly. Somewhere in Wyoming, far from any radar dish, cell tower, or city noise, a cabin sat nestled in the trees. It had a tin roof, an old weather vane shaped like a falcon, and a porch that creaked with the weight of seasons. Inside, Elias Trenmore stirred his coffee. Black, no sugar. Same as always. He sat in a wooden chair, boots crossed, a wool blanket draped over his knees. The fireplace crackled faintly. The radio was off. He didn't need to hear himself on the news. He already knew the story. He'd lived it once, then again, then one last time. On the table beside him sat a thin black folder, unmarked, government-issued. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, one confirming the activation of the Vulture Protocol, the other requesting his appearance at a ceremonial tribute in Washington. He hadn't opened either. Instead, his eyes wandered to something else on the table. A wallet, worn, leather, edges frayed. He opened it slowly. Inside was the old call sign patch, still stitched in place. The outline of a bird, not soaring, but perched, resting. He ran his fingers across it. The lines hadn't faded, just softened. Then he stood, walked to the porch, breathed in. Cold mountain air filled his lungs, sharp, crisp, cleansing. Not the synthetic kind pumped into cockpits, but the kind that reminded you that you were still human. He didn't need medals. He didn't need applause. What he needed was this, the quiet after the engine, the silence after the descent, the sky without weight. Behind him, the phone began to ring. He didn't move. Instead, his gaze drifted up toward the horizon, and somewhere, far above, invisible to the world, a contrail carved its way across the morning blue. He watched it fade, and smiled.